Okay, well, welcome to today's webinar, Fast and Secure Data, Addressing the Elephant in the Room, Data. My name is Ben Ross. I'm from Delphix. In a moment, we're going to hear from Gary Hallam, who's our speaker today. But before we do, there's just a couple of points I want to mention. The first point is that we are holding a prize draw. So we'll be announcing the winner of the prize draw at the end of the webcast. All you have to do to enter is to stay with us right till the end, and then my colleague Annabelle is going to announce, or I will announce the winner. She's going to tell me who the winner is at the end of the session. So stay with us and we'll announce the winner of our prize draw to win £100 worth of Amazon vouchers. The second point I wanted to make is that all the lines are muted, but we would really like to hear from you. So please do ask questions as we go along, and I'm going to be monitoring the questions throughout the session, and we've set aside time at the end to go through those with Gary. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Gary.
Thanks, Ben, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Welcome to Bookham, which is where I'm living. Hopefully there won't be too many noises in the background. My children will be quiet and doing all their schoolwork as they should be. Yeah, so fast and secure, addressing the elephant in the room. Let's talk about data and the DevOps pipeline. One of the things we live in a fantastic time, and there's a massive patterns of disruption, and it seems that no sooner do you have one light bulb moment that's shattered by the next one. The pace of change appears to be ever increasing. And as this slide shows, it's amazing to think that over half of the Fortune 500 firms have now gone before the end of the last decade, which is when I put this slide together. And that's incredible. It used to be that the big ate the small, and they made smaller acquisitions and developed capabilities in that way. But that's no longer the case. We now see that it's actually the fast who are eating the slow. And there's some amazingly sized organizations that have come to the fore, based on the internet, and which has been a great leveler, and the ability for small businesses to create enterprises in the cloud, if you like. There's a massive access to technology, and more importantly, a massive access to customers and the audiences. And if you look at this slide here, it's amazing to think that we've now done away with sort of bricks and mortar, and really applications today are built on applications and the data for those applications. You know, if you take Uber, Uber didn't really invent and doesn't own anything. They didn't invent. They really just built themselves on giants of technology. You know, the iPhone, iOS, Android. They didn't invent geolocation. They didn't invent mapping. They didn't invent payments. But they assembled all of that together to give us some incredibly capability that we didn't even realize we needed. And for me, you know, using Uber is just fantastically simple, and they've made things easier by leveraging technology, and the main thing that they've leveraged within that is data. So that brings us to the elephant in the room, and I have to confess that the elephant in the room wasn't my idea. I was researching some slides a couple of years ago, and this presentation, if you get a chance to watch it, is fantastic, and it talks about how this guy Michael Horenko put together his DevOps in a fairly sort of low tech company about health insurance, and it describes his process really, and the light bulb moment for him when he realized that the elephant in the room was data. So let's talk about it. And also there's a point on here as well. I presented this in Africa about a year ago, and they pointed out that wasn't actually an African elephant. So I'm going to liken elephants to data, and there are many different types of data, and this just goes to emphasize that point. So Why is moving elephants like moving data then? So I'm going to tell you a royal tale, which is quite an interesting and uplifting tale, actually. If you look at the website there, we'll pass these slides to you when I finished. But back in, I think it was 2016, the summer of 2016, Prince Harry spent 3 weeks out in Africa and got involved in this 500elephants.org. And their objective was to move some elephants. There was a success story in Luwandi National Park in Malawi, and they had too many elephants. And there was another park where all these elephants had been poached, and their numbers had dwindled from 1,500 down to just 100 elephants left. So they said, the best thing to do, let's move these elephants across Africa, and that proved to be quite a challenging task, not easy. I think at the end of the day, the prince managed to move about 200 elephants. There were still 300 left to move. And it took them over a year, but finally they actually moved 520 elephants, and they are successfully and happily breeding in a different part, and also beautiful part of the country. But why is it like moving data? Well, that's Prince Harry there on the right. It certainly isn't me. They've got the same color hair. It takes a lot of effort, right? Moving data takes a lot of effort. Moving an elephant takes an awful lot of effort, a lot of people. It also takes a lot of hardware. So, you know, moving that elephant, they had cranes, they had 3 helicopters, they had guns, they had 8 38-ton trucks. And once they've got all of those elephants, and actually capturing an elephant is a difficult task, right? It's a difficult, dangerous, and a dynamic process. No 2 captures are the same. And also, once you've got the elephant, there's a lot of manual intervention has to happen, right? So these elephants were moved, I think, about 350 kilometers north in the country. Took them 6 hours to get there in the truck. And I don't know about you, but that elephant looks like it's going to take an awful lot of refreshing once it gets to the destination, which reminds me of sort of non-production environments, data environments, which never really look that fresh. Some of them have been around for a few years, and they've got a lot of stale data in place. So, you know, let's look at a typical data environment. And this is generally, you know, what I've seen, right? You have a production environment, and that's where your elephant often resides, okay? So, you know, multi-terabyte databases. And often you find that companies are kind of trapped by the sheer scale and size of the data. I was working with a customer a couple of years ago, and when we started, their database was 9.5 terabytes. And by the time, it took them 6 months to get some infrastructure in place. And by the time that was in place, their production database had grown from 9.5 terabytes to 30 terabytes. So that's a big task, right? And moving that around is difficult, okay? But generally what we see is that in order to provide capability, in order to develop applications, we have to test those applications, and we have to create environments for those applications. So we have to move that elephant that's in production into all of those non-production environments. So you can have a test environment, a unit test environment, a user acceptance test environment, pre-production environment. And all of those environments take a lot of management. So it's not just the fact that the data is large and the infrastructure is large, but it takes a lot of people, a lot of time to manage those environments, and then also to reproduce the data that's needed in those environments to do the testing. And that is a big struggle. I talked to an organization maybe about a couple of years ago, and they told me that they had 60, that's 60 non-production environments, and that was an SAP database, and that wasn't small. So the bulk of their infrastructure went towards those non-production environments. And today, as we get more and more developers and we want to move things much more quickly, then we often need more environments in order to get the capability out there that our customers demand. So the volume of data and the sheer size of it isn't the only bottleneck that we need to deal with in IT. If you look at this slide here, it was a 451 piece of research. And there are a number of bottlenecks. One of the key ones is around governance, and we've seen that a lot recently with the advent of GDPR. So people are needing to actually protect the data that they've got in their non-production environments. They need to put a lot of controls in place in order to do that. And that takes time. It's difficult, right? And if you're masking data, there are a lot of nuances around how you mask data, how you actually discover the sensitive data. And if you are going to mask the data or use synthetic data, the applications have got to work. Not only have they got to work, but your data needs to meet all of the edge cases that are likely to cause issues in production. And that's not an easy task. And there's a lot of work that goes into a lot of large enterprises to find the actual useful data that's needed in order to test new capability and new applications. And then, of course, you've got the fact that the data is large, but not only that, the data's spread out, right? I mean, these elephants were spread out across Africa. It took them a long while to move, but the data is spread across siloed applications in the mainframe, also spread nowadays into the cloud, but not just one cloud, into hybrid clouds, multiple clouds. And that data all has to come together at some point in order to run your enterprise. So that's an issue for the teams that control data, and obviously the teams that need data, they've got a lot of pressures on them in order to get capability out of the door. So they need that data more and more quickly, in more and more complex scenarios, and aggregated more and more in order to do end-to-end testing of their environments. And in any business that we go in today, we see that data is an issue. And actually, if you look at the way technology works, getting access to infrastructure is not that difficult. We virtualized the infrastructure in order to create the applications, the environments, and we've gone a long way in order to get access to the code and change control over the code. But time and time again, I see that companies struggle around the data, and they're almost trapped by the data. I was talking with a customer just yesterday, and they were talking about an e-business suite environment, and we were saying, look, we just want to connect to production, and he was very nervous because he's got a 30 terabyte database, and within that terabyte that runs HR in e-business suite, but then also they're running the general ledger on that system. So touching that database is quite sensitive because all of those batch jobs have to run overnight. So they're really trapped in not being able to really touch that data, not being able to extract that data. It's a huge amount of data at 30 terabytes. They haven't got enough storage to manage all of that. And he was telling us, look, we've got some batch scripts that allow us to copy that data, but there's a lot of work that has to go in place to make that data usable in non-production. And they don't really have the capability nor the time to adjust those scripts. So refreshing that data is very, very difficult. So what does Delphix do then? So how do you create this digital safari or this digital capability of your data? How do you tame these elephants? Well, if you look at the capability that Delphix provides, we provide essentially a DataOps platform. And that platform provides kind of 3 layers of capability. The first layer is to virtualize the data. That is to capture the elephants, to ingest the data. We can also secure that data. So we can protect it by masking it. And then we've got the ability to manage the data. But not only that, we have this rich set of self-service controls that provide a level of capability to end users that is unparalleled, really, and it effectively provides DBA-like capability to almost business users. Okay. So let's have a look at this this platform then, and how we do this delivery piece. So I'm just going to go into the nuts and bolts. What actually is Delphix, and how does it work to do what it does, do the magic that it does? So if you look at the Delphix engine, it's imported into a hypervisor or provisioned onto a cloud platform. You give it some CPU and some RAM. It's storage agnostic. It likes to have tier 1 storage or flash storage. The reason for that will become apparent. And the first thing that we do is capture the data. So that's done in an automated way. So we automatically synchronize the Delphix engine with the production environment. And that's done using the technology, the database technologies that you're using today. Again, this customer I talked to yesterday was quite nervous of us touching his 30 terabyte Oracle database. But the way we operate with Oracle is to simply do an RMAN. We add an RMAN channel to the backup. So that's a recovery manager from Oracle. We ingest the data into Delphix. A very, very simple job. It's what the DBAs are already used to. But in this case, we do everything automatically, right? So we make the first ingestion of the data. So that 30 terabytes of data is going to take a while to get into Delphix, but we only ever do that once. We bring that data into the Delphix engine, put it onto this storage that we've assigned to the virtual machine, and we then do an incremental backup forever. So that means we just pick up the changes of data and add that to a rolling live archive of that production data. Now, just that process alone and automating that process changes the backup and recovery paradigm that people are used to in your organization. You now kind of have this jukebox of data, this time machine of data from which we are now able to provision virtual copies of data. So we've captured the elephant. We're keeping it almost in real time, and we're incrementally adding the changes. So at any point in time, we're now able to provision data. And the way that we provision data is not actually by moving anything at all. So we're not taking these elephants from Liwonde to Nkota Kota. We're actually just creating a set of pointers on a target environment. We'll then we'll create an NFS mount point and just point that database, that data set of database binaries, we'll point that at the VDB storage, the virtual database storage in the Delphix storage. And we're able to provision a database within a few minutes. So if we talk about our 30 terabytes, we ingested that into Delphix. Often we compress that down to about 30% of its size. So we've reduced that down to 10 terabytes. But when we provision a virtual database, we're just provisioning a few gigabytes of data, which represents the file system pointers to that data. Now that target database is read-writable. So it looks, smells, feels, and tastes like a real database. You can act on it like a real database. The applications will know no difference. It's a database. Okay, you can back it up, you can do whatever you want with it. As soon as you change a row in that database or add a new row, what you're actually doing is, instead of moving things, what Delphix will do, it will create a new block of data, and that new block of data will provide a pointer to it that's private to that virtual database. So in effect, you've got a read-write copy that's going to share most of the data, but any new data, any new blocks of data will have private pointers to that data. So it's effectively its own data. The value that we can do, so we could mask that data, but also we can have an infinite number of clones from clones. So to provision a database, one of the biggest I've seen from a SQL Server perspective is about 70 terabytes. And our customer told us that gets provisioned in 15 minutes. I've seen 10 terabytes provisioned in around about 4.5, 5 minutes. Okay, so that's this capability that you're bringing. Again, you can, by cloning from clones, you can kind of create a master copy and then copy from copies, and you can do that any number of times. There's no real logical limit to the number of copies from copies that you can create with Delphix. And also, it doesn't have to be masked data, right? It could be you want to offload production with, for management information purposes, or for truing up your general ledger. So, offload production for check writing or whatever. There are reasons why you might want to run an end of day process on something that isn't the real database, so that you offload that database and allow the transactional capability not to be hampered by the performance issues with writing reports or running batch jobs on the data. So there we have it. That's how we deliver data. Put some questions in the chat and we'll pick those up shortly. Hopefully that's given you a good picture. So let's look at now how do we do the acceleration? How do we accelerate the work of developers and testers with Delphix? Well, what we're able to do is create these self-service data operations. So we create a self-service container, and that really empowers the users. As a consumer, you've got instant data access, you've got a personal environment, you've got self-service controls for that environment. You don't need to know anything about being an Oracle DBA or a SQL Server DBA or a DB2 DBA or an ASE DBA. You just need to understand how this self-service user interface works, right? You get full fresh data and there are no administration tasks for you to worry about. Similarly, from a data provider perspective, you've got the ability to protect sensitive data. You automatically retain governance and compliance because you've gone through the governance processes and you've automated the delivery of those data processes to environments that you know about and that are tested and validated through Delphix. Okay, you've got delivery automation, you've got self-service automation, you're managing the data sprawl, and a side effect is that you're reducing the storage overhead. So across all of our customers, Delphix on average, for customers that give us that information, they on average save about 80% of their non-production storage. That is to say, with the number of environments that you can create with Delphix non-production environments, they're running on 80% less storage footprint than they would be if they were physical environments. So what does this self-service tool look like? What does it offer? So what Delphix does, you can put multiple virtual databases into this self-service container. And the end user has the ability to bookmark that, version, refresh, restore, branch, and share that data. So what does that mean? So if you take a look at this picture here, this is an old copy of the user interface. It's got some big buttons at the top. And they're quite simple, right? Along the middle of the diagram, you can see a timeline where that red star represents now. So if you clicked on that red star and you said, press the bookmark button, what that is doing is creating a snapshot of your database. So effectively, if you were a tester and you wanted to run some tests on a system, and that system consisted of, let's say, an Oracle database, a SQL Server database, and a MySQL database, and we put all of those databases inside of this container. When we press that bookmark button, what we're actually doing is copying the pointers to that data. Now that data could be 30 terabytes, but the pointers will just be a few megabytes or a few gigabytes, and that bookmark process will take just a few seconds. And what we have there, you've just backed up your database, not just the Oracle database. You've backed up the Oracle database, the SQL Server database, the MySQL database. It's now you can restore back to that point in time. So what's the value of that then? From a test team perspective, we've just created a baseline. We can now go and run our tests. Those tests can be destructive, intentionally or unintentionally so. And when we get to the point where we've finished our test or we've broken the system, what we can actually do is actually click on the bookmark that we created, and then we can click that restore button at the top. And what that will do is recover all of those databases back to the production, back to the bookmark point in time. So you've got a baseline, you've run your tests, you've rewound back to the baseline, you're ready to test again. That's fantastic. And that's a massive amount of capability. But not only that, when you've created a bookmark, you can see that share button there. You can actually share your bookmark. So if you can imagine, I've created two virtual databases. I put one virtual database in the testers container. I put the other virtual database in the developers container. The tester has a problem. He creates a bookmark at the point in time that he's got the problem, hits the share button, calls the developer up or raises a ticket, and then says to the developer, or the developer would say to the tester, well, how do I recreate the problem? And they say, well, I can do one better than that. Here's the bookmark, restore your virtual database to my bookmark point in time, and you can see what the problem is. And that massively improves the software development lifecycle. So that's great, right? We've got this bookmark. That's fantastic. We've got our virtual set of databases that represent our system. We can baseline, we can bookmark errors, we can rewind, and that brings us some fantastic capability. It allows us to retain pristine information. So, you know, the issue with testing data is that, you know, if I'm testing a claim system for an insurance company, and I, you know, find the data that I want, the 45-year-old woman with a certain policy, and then I run through and make that claim. Now, if that breaks, I want to run the test again. What am I going to do? Do I need to look for the same amount, the same data again? I have difficulty finding that data, or I can hit the rewind button on Delphix and I can run the test again until we got the code right. But it's even better than that, actually, because the other button there, that branching button, that brings some other capabilities. So what a branch will do, it does almost the same process, right? We will take a snapshot of the pointers of data, but now we keep the old snapshot and the new snapshot in different compartments. And that new snapshot that we've created will actually drop the virtual database, drop the database, and then we'll bring it back up on the new branches set of pointers. So what have I done there? What I've actually done is created a copy of my virtual database. Or in fact, I've created a copy of my 3 databases. If I've still got my Oracle, my SQL Server, and my SQL database, I've just created a branch, and now I've got a copy of those databases. I could then press this button here and refresh, and I would refresh the data from the source. And now I've got 2 copies of database. One is the old copy that I was working on, and the new one, the new branch is now refreshed from production or from the source database. It could be a master database, and I'm now able to work on that new data. So think about that for a moment. I've just, as an end user on this user interface, without any DBA access to that database, so I'm protecting the database, the non-production database, without any real access, just going through this user interface, I've now just restored a copy of data. But not only that, I've restored, let's say, 30 terabytes of data on almost no storage footprint. So not only am I saving infrastructure, not only am I not having to talk to sysadmins or DBAs, but I've now created a new copy of 30 terabytes of data in a few minutes. And I can do that any number of times. So I can create any number of branches of this data. So what I can effectively do is create a catalog of data. And if I was a DBA, you know, that data, I could go in there and delete all of the tables and create new tables. And in actual fact, I've got a whole different set of data. I can create a catalog of different sets of data. Admittedly, I can only activate 1 copy of that database at any one point in time. But what I've effectively got is I've got DBA-like capability over multiple databases. I've got a catalog. I can now work on whatever project I want at whatever level of whatever version of the database that I want to work on. And I can do that with impunity. The application is connecting to the same database. The connection string is the same, but I control what data gets delivered to that connection string. And it's just an incredible capability, and something that you know, many organizations battle with. Getting access to the right data is almost impossible. Like I say, people are trapped in this world where they've, you know, the database has grown so large that they daren't touch it. They barely get able to run their batch jobs through the night. If any performance impact hits that database, they're going to be in trouble. And I know all about that because I used to run a managed service for Orange, actually, and that we used to sort of say that we could deliver 1 million messages a day, and Orange made us prove that. And you know, we did prove it, but that made our database very, very large, and I was the man responsible for that. And eventually it got too big for me, and I had to leave the business because I wasn't able to run the batch jobs within the time frame allowed. So that's the power of self-service, right? We've got these branches, we've got these bookmarks, we can share the bookmarks, we can version data like code. And, you know, we've got the data operator can give you a data pod or a self-service access, and the developer no longer has to work with the DBA again. And this is sort of describes that process of ingesting the data, preparing the data, maybe making a master copy, and then the downstream environments can have multiple copies of that data in a data catalog. And by the way, those end users can also manage the size of that data. So not only do the operators dictate a limit to the size of the data available to that virtual database, but the end user can delete the copies that they make. So they can delete bookmarks and they can delete branches. So it's all under their own control. But equally, the DBAs and the admins have control of how much data they're allowing those end users to consume. And this is quite an interesting one. I'm always reminded by a DBA lead that came to me, and he said when they implemented Delphix within Channel 4, he said it was eye-opening to see the change in the relationship between the DBAs and the dev team, because they had a real issue. You know, whenever the dev team wanted a copy of the database, there was a massive amount of manual effort to go through a spreadsheet to work out what database changes have been put in place in order to allow that team to refresh the data and get to work again. And that wasn't a trivial task. And if the dev team then, you know, or the tester team broke that database, that data had to be recovered again. But that relationship went away. And one of the biggest things as well that they said was the fact that they had very, very few environmental problems, particularly in going up into production, because that had completely been removed by the fact that they'd automated everything. So that's how we accelerate. So if we now take a quick look at the governance side of this DataOps platform, what do we mean by that? Well, within Delphix, we've got a masking tool, and that masking tool can discover data using a profiler. We can secure the data, and we can audit who's actually run that data. And we can also, there's a little bit of a workflow as well, so that if we change the masking job, we could need that approved before we can actually run that masking job against the new database. So how does Delphix masking work? So it's comprehensive, consistent, and usable. What we do is we reversibly transform sensitive data values into fictitious but realistic data values, and we do that in a patented and very, very simple way. Okay, and by keeping data masking simple, you keep it fast, right? You always, whenever you're masking data, you have to think of the purpose that you're masking data for, and try and keep it as simple as possible. That's not always feasible, and there are reasons for that, right? But if you can mask as simply and irreversibly and as repeatably as possible, then you get some great advantages, right? So from a Delphix perspective, we provide a few algorithms out of the box. The most used algorithm is a secure lookup algorithm. And all that is, we take the original value, we do a hash on that value, we mod it, we take that remainder, that number that we've got, and we go and look in a secure lookup table and replace that value with a value we find in this secured lookup table. And that works across all of the multiple data sources. So whether the data is in Oracle, SQL Server, on a file system, or in a mainframe, vSAM file, or DB2 mainframe database, we will mask it in exactly the same way. And what that provides us is that referential integrity. It provides referential integrity, the strict referential integrity within the database itself, but also enterprise referential integrity, the loose referential integrity introduced by either your application or the different systems that you're working on within the enterprise. So that's a fantastic way to do masking. Secure lookups massively simplify the masking process. They're secure and irreversible, and they are no-code, low-code approach. So the subject matter expert or the business expert, the data expert, can actually easily implement these algorithms. It makes sense. It's easy to use. We don't have to understand the structure of the database itself. We just need to know what the data is and how we want that to be masked. Delphix offers some out-of-the-box algorithms, easy to use. You can customize these algorithms that come out of the box I won't go through these in this presentation. Needless to say, it's quick and easy to do the masking. The free text redaction algorithm is quite beautiful in the way that it's implemented. We can either use a white list of values or a black list of values. So that means, you know, we either mask the data we describe, or we mask the data that we haven't described. So that's kind of a white list, really. So if you mask the data that you haven't described, that's much more secure than masking the data that you know about. You're masking everything you don't know about, which is good. The other thing is that within that free text redaction algorithm, we can also use regular expressions to discover the data that we want to mask or that we don't want to mask. So that's quite useful. But on top of that, if none of these customized out-of-the-box algorithms work, you can also create a custom algorithm that wraps, that you can build, you know, whatever esoteric masking capability you need, you can build that within the tool. There's a little bit more work to do that, but it's feasible. So we talked about delivering data, we talked about accelerating your end users, we talked about governing and masking data. Delphix, the DataOps platform, provides that and gives you that out of the box. And I think the main thing for me, whenever I see this product implemented, is the simplicity. If you talk to any technician, they'll say, yeah, well, you know, Oracle can do all of that. We've got flash clones from Oracle. You know, we've got flash recovery. There's lots of things that we can do, but none of those tools give you that full capability across the piece. And if they do, they're so complex that they're almost impossible to use. And I know that because I used to work for Oracle and I used to sell their grid control, their management tool. And trust me, that is almost impossible to use, the full reach of the capability of that. With Delphix, it's massively simple, very, very simple, and it's simplified and it's designed for the end user. It's designed to mask quickly. It's designed to deliver data very, very quickly. But the other thing we talked about, or I wanted to talk about, was automation, okay? Because, you know, it's great having a self-service tool and it's great having users able to pull together and start to, you know, create a baseline, do some testing, rewind, start again. But actually the real value comes when you automate all of this. Okay, so really if you want to get to full continuous integration or continuous delivery, you have to be doing small scale changes that are tested on full scale sets of data. You know, it's great if you want to create synthetic data and do a small unit test. But actually, if you're going to be putting this thing in production, you better have tested all of the edge cases, right? In order to do that, really, you need a full set of production data, and that really ought to be masked as well. But what Delphix delivers in its administration tool and in its self-service tool is also available in an API. And that API is public API. If you you can actually run the command line interface. You can run that in verbose mode, and you can actually see all of the REST API commands being delivered. And that allows you to use those commands and build whatever you want. You could build your own interface if you liked using Delphix. But I think people are using that more importantly within the DevOps tool chain, so that when you update an application, you're able to spin up a copy of the data. And you're able to spin up a self-service container and run through tests on that, get the results of those tests, rewind and run the tests again. So let's say if you wanted, within Delphix, you could create, if you wanted to test the end of day process on 7 days of the week, with Delphix, you spin up the virtual database. You've got 7 copies within a container. You instantiate the first one, Sunday's data, run the test, Monday's data, run the test, and you can do that automatically on full data, 30 terabytes of data delivered in a few minutes. You can run through those tests, and that gives you true CI/CD, true automated testing, true continuous integration. And if you look at the way that our customers use that, right? So, if you've got this fast data agility from a test data management perspective, you can do all these source code management within with fast data underneath, with Delphix underneath, you can subset your data. You might want to synthesize your data. You might be using paid for tools or these free tools that are described here. You're able to mask and distribute that data, and that allows you to do that test automation and release automation as well. So not only do we have the virtualization API, but we also have a masking API. And the value of the masking API is it's easy to see, right? If when you go into a large enterprise and you show them a user interface and you say, look, oh, you can create a masking job from this, and then the customer comes back to you and says, yeah, but I've got 2,000 databases. How do I discover all the sensitive values in those 2,000 databases when one of them's an SAP database and that's 140,000 tables? All of a sudden, your user interface isn't looking very effective, right? But what Delphix delivers is an API that allows you to build profiling jobs. It allows you to build masking jobs. It allows you to build the connectors, the rule sets, the inventories, the environments. So you can actually automate that sensitive data discovery job process. So you can profile your data automatically, and you can mask the data more automatically. More importantly as well, that API gets leveraged within the Delphix virtualization piece. So if you're wanting to actually protect your database and you want to mask the data, you better be using a virtualization tool before you start doing the masking, because masking jobs, they're pretty straightforward and they might run very quickly, but a lot of them are running on a massive amount of data. I've seen billions of rows get masked through Delphix, and every now and then a job might fail. We had a customer where someone was logging into the system and getting access to the system and killing the masking job in order to do some work on the database. It took us a while to understand that was happening, but once that was happening, this was happening actually on a mainframe database, so they had to start again. But with Delphix, if you virtualize the database and the job fails, you just simply rewind and start again very, very quickly. So that's the masking API. The other key piece as well is around data protection and delivery of data and delivery of mass data, is this idea of replication and what Delphix describes as selective data distribution. So if you've got two Delphix engines, we can replicate between those two engines. And that replication is encrypted, it's throttled, and that throttling thing is massively important, right? So if you want to move 100 terabytes of data from one data center to another data center, that's going to take quite a long time, okay? But if you throttle that, and it could potentially flood the network, but if you throttle that, that process of replicating the data, then you can run the job over a period of time. And because Delphix replicates incrementally, you can do the bulk of the replication, and then each time you re-replicate, you're just replicating the changed data. And that's really powerful in terms of migrating data to another data center, or more importantly, migrating things to the cloud. The other thing that we've got is that selective data distribution, which ensures that only masked blocks of data get moved to that second engine. And our customers use that for data residency laws and to make sure that data is masked before it gets moved into the cloud. So it accelerates the adoption of cloud, and it accelerates data migration and cloud migration projects. Now we're coming to the sort of final point I mentioned in the build up to this presentation. And one of the things I'm really excited about within Delphix is the Agile mainframe. So how, I always get asked all the time, we talk to customers that say, yeah, that's great, you can virtualize Oracle database, MySQL, MongoDB and all of that, but we've still got this mainframe data that we have to handle. And therefore just virtualizing the Oracle side or the SQL database side on our open systems doesn't really help us. There are two things I'd say to that. First of all, you've got to start somewhere. And actually, by virtualizing the data and giving users self-service, even if they're just unit testing, you're giving them a lot of value, you're giving them access to the data, and you're solving that problem of being trapped by the size of your database. So there is value in doing that. But if you look at what we're working on at the moment within Delphix, I've seen good proof of concepts around the top two of these components. So with IBM's ZPDT, development environments. So that's where the IBM mainframe gets dropped onto a Linux environment. We've got a couple of customers now that are working on that, because once you've got the database, the IBM system running on Linux, then we can virtualize the file system in Linux, and we can virtualize, therefore, the DB2 and the ZOS applications that are running on that system. I've also seen a fantastic demo with LZ Labs. LZ Labs is more around migrating off of the mainframe, so getting completely out of the mainframe. And again, they put the information into a Linux environment and on a Postgres database. And again, I've seen Delphix virtualize and mask that database. And fantastic to see Delphix spinning up a clone of a mainframe environment. And then the other option you could use is the DB2 DRDA, where you can do an alias where you put the data into a Linux environment. And again, Delphix is able to replicate that. So exciting things going on within Delphix. And that really comes to the end of our presentation. Hope you've enjoyed what you've seen. Any questions?
Yeah, so thanks, Gary. Yeah, we have one question just come in, which I'll read out. So it says, "Hi, Gary. We have Delphix recently, but we have a challenge with test automation, as we have 18 environments with 18 VDBs. How to run the automated test within the pipeline? Question mark."
Right. Okay. We have to pick that up offline, I think. But in terms of running you've got 18 environments with 18 virtual databases. Okay, I mean 18 is quite a number. I've seen up to about 10 in a single self-service interface, but there'd be no reason why you can't automate that. I mean, Ahmed, I'm not sure whether you've used the Delphix API. But certainly, the other thing around the API that I didn't mention is that we've put a wrapper around that. So there's an open source wrapper. We've got a Python wrapper and a Perl wrapper. The thing called the DX Toolkit, which is managed or handled mainly by a guy called Marcin. You can take a look at that. But that really, really simplifies usage of the API. It trivializes it, in fact. And the ability to spin up those 18 VDBs should be fairly straightforward. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to have some interesting time around the applications, okay? Because you've obviously got to, if you want to automate things, you've got to create those VDBs, you've got to create the applications as well. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to automate that in a fairly straightforward way. But definitely, I mean, I'd need to understand the detail of the problems that you're facing, Ahmed. I don't know, can we unmute people?
Well, I think probably the best thing is we can follow up after the session.
Okay.
I've got an eye on time here. Time's marching on, so maybe we could follow up with you.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, have a conversation, and I'm sure we can help.
Yeah. Okay. Ahmed says, "Okay, fine." Thanks.
That's brilliant. Okay, thanks, Ahmed.
Okay, so just one other question around high availability. So if you have a big outage of your infrastructure or databases, how can Delphix help with high availability?
Well, it's sort of a number of ways, really. So if you look at, I was talking to this customer I was talking to yesterday. They don't actually back up their non-production environments, right? So they just have to restore, and because it takes a long time to refresh the data, that's going to take a long time and a long outage for those developers. But if you look at the sort of production use cases, so with Delphix, you've got a kind of a rolling live archive of that data that doesn't change. And what we see a lot of production sort of recovery is based upon having an exact copy of the production database being replicated in real time, or sometimes that's delayed by a few minutes. I saw one customer that delayed it by 2 hours, because the issue is if a DBA drops a table, then that removing that table gets replicated to the backup environment instantly. So then you have to go back up to recovery and then roll forward on your logs. And that can take a significant amount of time. So what Delphix provides is a really, really fast recovery time and a recovery point objective. Okay, because and what I mean by that, if a DBA drops a table and that gets replicated over to the backup system or the replicated system, in Delphix you've got a copy of the data. Okay, so what you're able to do with Delphix is do that kind of forensic recovery. So if you want to recover a table or some rows within a table, it's very, very quick, very easy with Delphix, and doesn't require much expertise whatsoever. So you can spin up a copy of the virtual database from a few minutes ago, get hold of the table, and then copy that data out, and that's massively valuable. Particularly useful, you know, when a DBA does drop a table in production, and believe me, it happens many more times than you would care to think. And almost every customer I've spoken to has used Delphix to save their bacon, if you like, and save a significant amount of revenue as well by having the ability to recover those tables. The other piece of that is in non-production, and if you're not backing up non-production, perhaps you ought to be. And we ran through some interesting tests with one of our banking customers recently, where with Delphix, that replication allows you to replicate all of your data to a separate Delphix engine, and you can actually fail over to that separate Delphix engine. And we've been doing a lot of work recently, so we've now got smart failover that's coming out in the next release, which manages or any conflicts that you might have when you do that failover to a Delphix engine. So that's really quite a powerful capability.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. So we'll probably call a halt to the Q&A there, just conscious of time. If you click over to the next slide, I just wanted to highlight some further reading. So there's lots and lots of content available on delphix.com. So if you go to delphix.com and then click on resources, you can see a whole back catalogue of white papers, solution briefs, and also webinars as well, just like this one that are recorded that you can stream live or download. A lot of those have live demos in them as well. And if you want to delve more into our products, then again, delphix.com, and then go to products, and there's lots of information, detailed information on our products there for you to take a look at. So I encourage you to go to delphix.com and check all that lot out. And then Gary, if you move us on one more. So we've got our next webinar coming up on the 6th of May. This is with my colleague Mark McGill. It's titled Accelerating App Dev, Moving Dev Test to the Cloud. So Mark is going to be outlining, he's also going to be demoing how you can accelerate application development life cycles by moving dev test environments out to the cloud. So yeah, don't miss that on the 6th of May. There'll be a link for you to register for that will follow after this session. It will be in the thank you email that goes out after this webcast. And then finally, we've got to do the draw. So my colleague Annabelle has already picked a name out at random. So the winner of the £100 Amazon voucher is Jerzy Badowski. So well done, Jerzy. Annabelle will be in touch with you. We've got all your details. So Annabelle's going to be in touch with you to figure out how we get that Amazon voucher over to you. So well done with that. And then finally, Gary, if you move on to the next slide, is a big thank you. So firstly, thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. I hope you found it a really interesting session. Thank you to Gary for presenting. Great job with that. And we hope to see you all for the next webinar with Mark on the 6th of May. Thanks very much.